Hello, welcome to our first screencast of the course. The ideas might become clear. Behind a screencast is for me to share with you some content that would typically be presented in a more lecture style format online, so you can view it at your own leisure, as well as it frees up some time for in-class conversations, activities, and so forth. Our first screencast here is like an introductory, I suppose, session on sort of different conceptions of global citizenship education. You all selected the UTS cohort for various reasons, one of which I hope and I sense is it's true because of some interest in this thing called global education, citizenship education, and others of you maybe just were attracted to working in a school, UTS particularly, but this is a theme that will be running up the narrative of our course, as well as ideally your time at UTS, as it is part of the school mandate to promote socially responsible global citizens throughout their entire program. So what is global citizenship education? It is, as the subtitle suggests, a really crowded discipline field filled with a range of concepts, theorists, approaches, policies, etc. And so this introductory screencast is a bit of an overview to try to present some common language, or at least some orientation to some of the material that's out there. Even thinking, so, you could say, well, global citizenship is probably about the world, right? And so looking at these two images here, they're both about the world. This one below is, though, communicates a different kind of energy, maybe a sense of optimism, this notion of this embrace of the range of peoples across the planet linking hands, common identity, global challenges, where this one up here conveys, I think, at least to me, a more kind of, I don't know, sinister, critical, lurking, questioning kind of engagement with the world, both about global perspectives, but the perspectives which they bring come from quite different stances. So in this screencast, I'm going to try to share with you a little bit of like, okay, so what is a global citizen? And acknowledge that it's a big field of study. I'll share with you how I came to it and gives you a bit of a sense of the orientation that I carry to the work. I'll introduce you to a few conceptual models, reviewing some of the work from Evans and others, as well as Oxley and Morris. And then you'll see, or I'll try to convey, how all these conceptual models really are further informed or shaped by the kind of stance that you bring towards citizenship education, whether it be an emphasis on personal, participatory, or justice stances. And once you're thoroughly confused with all of that, I'll give you a bit of a sense, or aim to give you a bit of a sense of where all this broad conceptual material might find itself located in Ontario policy, Character Education Policy 21st Century Global Competencies document was released just earlier this year, as well as the Inclusive Ed Strategy, and conclude with a UNESCO example. So to begin with this question of what is a global citizen, I'm going to share with you contents of a video from folks, participants, as you can see down here, were in 2015, they were at this UNESCO Global Citizenship Education Conference, and invited some of the participants to communicate what their thoughts on global citizenship are.
Let me think about
This is the difficult question. I must say, a global citizen is, in my opinion, a global citizen is someone who knows he or she is not only part of his family or her family or her city or her country, but part of a bigger scenery of a bigger world. A global citizen is somebody who has respect for himself first. Global citizen is a citizen in the globe. This is about building our understanding about the globe, about the world, its complexities, its dynamics.
Global citizen is one who has the skills, the knowledge, and the values to be able to live well with people who are within his or her community, within his or her nation, and globally. Okay.
A global citizen
is unique as everyone else. Everyone should be a global citizen because we live in a very interconnected and interdependent world. We live in an age and time when we cannot be without understanding the other.
Since we are part of the world, we have the responsibility to make our world better.
Everyone should be a global citizen because we live in one society, and as what the Ubuntu said, I am because you are, and because you are, I am. So everyone is interconnected, and that everyone has to be aware, and has to be respectful, and has to embrace the concept of diversity.
As a global citizen, I think it's very important that I'm able to encounter and connect with a number of different cultures and different peoples around the world. Well, that's a good question. As a global citizen, I'm always trying to engage in certain actions to solve problems I think are urgent or matters.
What I do is every opportunity that I get, I educate other people on what it means to be a global citizen and why it is very essential.
What I do basically now is first learning to respect myself, learning to understand that I'm a citizen and I'm qualified to live like other people.
As a global citizen, well, I think being a global citizen is just being a human. So I'm being a human.
Okay, well, certainly a wide range of notions of what it might mean to be a global citizen, from being a human to someone intimately connected to change, others around individual responsibility, others around inclusion. You did get a sense of, clearly from that video, that people who even are attending this UN summit, if you will, in global citizenship education, have a disparate range of views, and I suppose in the moment might find themselves struggling to articulate as fulsomely as they might want. So just from the UN language, I think there's a Global Citizenship First initiative, which was launched by Ban Ki-moon a couple of years ago, came with it 3 priorities, and really at the heart of it is that this notion that it's not simply enough for schools and societies to produce, as it says there, individuals who can read, write, and count. Literacy, numeracy, absolutely key and core, but that education must have more, assume more of a central role in helping people forge a more just, which is something about justice, peaceful, tolerant, and inclusive society. And that citizenship education is to take up all these interconnected challenges of the 21st century, including climate change, conflict, poverty, etc., as you see there on the page. It's a pretty big, broad invitation to take on all sorts of things that matter, which is pretty exciting. If you want to read more about what the UN says and from a stances and from a particular position, I've linked there the Asia Society, who's another big player in the whole global education scene, and it gets into a little bit more discussion around what global citizenship education might look at from their standpoint. So for me, my entry points in this very disparate field that continues to shift and grow and morph and is filled with multiple perspectives came when I was a grad student, I think 4 lives ago, when I was a grad student up at York in environmental studies. And I was really interested in fusing the issues around critical pedagogy, which some of you may be familiar with the work of Frere and others, as listed down here. And really, these were questions typically around race and class and how schools operated, typically in reproducing inequities through pedagogical practices, the structures of schooling, and so forth. So those are by and large the interests of critical pedagogy, and I was interested in that material and its relation to the environmental movement, and particularly deep ecology, and where this notion that all living things have an intrinsic value and that the diversity of life. So is I guess to be respected and embraced in a way just in the same way as all humans are, and that at that point in time there's this big barrier between these two disciplines, these two sort of discourses, if you will, and I was really interested in building bridges across the two. I did a study on the science curriculum at the time, and I was looking at the social construction of nature and curious about what kind of message around class and race were being communicated through that curriculum, and what kind of notions of nature are being created as well. Anyway, so that was my entry point. I was trying to find this intersection, and it fit largely, I think, under a global ed kind of frame. And then I decided, like, okay, grad school, great, big field with big ideas and, you know, broad concepts. What might that look like in the ground? So as a new teacher, I said, so what might these notions look like in classrooms? And so I sought to connect with other teachers with similar interests. I became part of a working group with folks that were led by Graham Pike and David Selby, who are two big global educators from the UK who had taken up residency in Canada and Noisy particularly, working with school boards. And like you will over the next couple of years, I worked with other teachers, pursued other people in school through your practica, through your program, who were interested in similar issues as I, and really sought to say, what does global ed look like? How would that play out in the classroom? And I honestly started mostly with a focus on issues, topics, content around equity, global, and eco themes, and I tried to insert them into well, not all, but as many lessons as I could. I learned over time, or I found over time, that from my students, my issues and global issues and all that may not really be that important or of interest to them. And so I was sort of forced to shift my focus on global issues to an attention to their reality. Quite honestly, the demands of the job were such that to come up with creative curriculum all the time was difficult, and I began to be more sympathetic to, because of my location of work in quote-unquote inner city schools, more curious about how it was that schools issues around class and race and gender and etc. And sexual identity and so forth were reproduced, challenged, or changed in school classrooms. So it was less about I was bringing content in, and I was more interested and committed to learning about their lives from them and trying to be responsive in my pedagogy. Again, that sounds kind of broad. Now, in the last 10 years or so, I've reverted back to attention to global, because now I start to see that global education really picks up a theme around their transnational identity, meaning that the students in the class are not just race, they're not just class identities, but they are also shaped and informed by their own transnational identities, their backgrounds, oftentimes as new Canadians or children, second generation immigrants, that identity really shapes, and that we work in global classrooms, not just classrooms defined by ethnicity and so forth, but by a global identity. So it's kind of where I moved along in my trajectory. Along the way, I encountered all sorts of different approaches to global education, which are kind of captured in some ways by some of these images here on these books. Different approaches here of texts like this, people embracing that really a theoretical or conceptual area, which is kind of maybe one that I'm more comfortable in, or one that I pursued at a point in time, or others really foreground global education with an attention on spirituality, in this case an ecosophy or ecological spirituality. Other people come to global citizenship education through an emphasis on peace studies. Others focus on more of sort of a human rights, so the work of UNICEF, human rights including children's rights, and where others come to global citizenship or global education through sort of almost a developmental education background. They're all fit under the umbrella of global education, global citizenship education, but they come out having different priorities and foci. So I'm trying to give you a little bit more of a structured overview of different entry points, and by sharing these with you, I'm not suggesting that, well, honestly, I have my own kind of lens and entry point, but just acknowledging that there are multiple entry points, and that will be true for all of you. Going to be coming from a slightly different vantage point. The work of Oxley and Morris shared that with you as an attachment if you're interested in getting a more fulsome description. But basically what they've done is they've looked at the survey, the field of all global citizenship education, and tried to come up with a topology, and they came up with this idea that there are two broad categories, a cosmopolitan type and an advocacy type. The cosmopolitan type is further broken down to 4 subcategories, and whether it be an emphasis on political citizenship, moral, economic, or cultural, and provides to you, and that might be helpful for some entry points through very theoreticians or scholars who have worked through that particular lens. The basic idea, if you think of you think of someone who's really cosmopolitan, often the emphasis on cosmopolitan orientations to global issues is an emphasis on the individual and their relationship to the world. So in terms of political global citizenship from a cosmopolitan orientation is thinking about, okay, particular individuals and the relation to states, global organizations, what have you, and that the focus is on the individual to the state. Morally, again, this is a more of an individualistic notion that emphasis on individual human rights in international contexts. In this case, economic global citizenship focuses again on not necessarily the superstructural kinds of things like questions on capitalism or structure of the economy or movement of globalization. More really focuses on investigating, okay, how am I as a global actor in the economic sphere? The last one, how am I a global actor in the cultural sphere, the media and arts? So that's one kind of broad conception that focuses on the individual's identity, relationship to the world. The global citizen here could then see themselves as a cosmopolitan lens, as living in anywhere and really thinking about their multiple threads of connections to the world, but not necessarily about changing it. They're connected, but unlike the advocacy types of less interested in change, the advocacy kinds of models or approaches to global citizenship education clearly are about a social change dimension, whether that be around global civil society as referenced here, and really about advocacy and focusing on, okay, so how can people's movements take on changes in the state? That relates in some ways to the political global citizenship. Then there's the critical global citizenship, and this is the work where it's really looking at deeper structural issues, if you will. How is it that certain kinds of equities are produced and reproduced through the way we've structured economies, structured our relationships, etc. I apologize for speaking so broadly, but these are broad characterizations. There's an advocacy type of folks who found themselves under the global education umbrella with an emphasis on environmental and or spiritual, as I referenced before. That's one way that Oxley and Morris have tried to categorize the multiple dimensions of how you approach global citizenship education. Another model I'll share with you is one, the work of Evans, Gambier, Broad, and I guess, myself, where when trying to categorize global citizenship through an emphasis on learning goals. There may well be all these different kinds of orientations, but that all of them cohere under some prioritization of learning around these goals. So that, not surprisingly, your curriculum might be around studying global themes or structures. So issues around poverty, development issues, structures like global bodies like the UN, UNESCO, etc. And similar, all these petals represent different learning goals, which they may overlap, but have some distinction. And that when you're studying, say, global issues, you need to perhaps examine issues around privilege, power, and equity with the intent of trying to produce informed, purposeful action, developing people's critical literacy capacities, that one needs to be respectful and mindful of the diversity of beliefs and worldviews, etc., etc. And so that whereas people think oftentimes, and this is where I began my career, that learning, being a global education-oriented teacher was really about these two pedals. When you look at that, this broader range of learning goals, you then become to see that you have multiple entry points of which you can begin to think of yourself as embracing a global citizenship education agenda. Similar to part of that same conceptual model is that emphasis not only on the learning goals or almost content pieces, but that the teaching and learning practices are as important, so that when you're thinking of yourself as a global citizenship educator, you're not simply looking at issues and content, but you're also thinking about how it is that you're setting up a classroom environment, whether you are providing a range of learning resources that students have driven inquiry kinds of projects can access, thinking around how your assessment evaluation practices are supporting and being mindful, say, for example, of equity issues, or how is it developing a critical literacy capacity. How is it that you're building a respectful, inclusive, and interactive classroom within your school is all part of the conceptualization of what it would be to be a global citizenship educator. So that we see, thankfully, that it's as much about pedagogy and stance as it is about content. Why I say thankfully is oftentimes people in the sciences to some degree, and particularly in the maths, sometimes in phys ed and other subject areas, or maybe even music, they go, oh, really, all what you've just described sounds like me, why I entered teaching, it's what I want to take up, but I don't see it in my curriculum. And the idea being is that it's not just about your subject content, but it's also about your stance and your approach to your students, so that if you are, promoting a learner-centered and culturally responsive teaching practice, that could be very much about promoting a classroom which is conducive to developing global citizenship. So it's true that there are multiple conceptions and ways of categorizing global citizenship education. I've only landed on a couple of the conceptual models to share with you, but I think for me, what I found particularly helpful is emphasizing this notion of stance. So you have these conceptual models, but it's also about how you just conceptualize or your core assumptions. And the work of Westheimer is, I think, pretty helpful here. He categorizes three different types of approaches to citizenship education. One being this emphasis on personal responsible, a second being on participatory citizenship, and a third on justice-oriented citizenship. And so under the personal responsible citizen is someone who is interested in acting responsibly in his or her community. You're trying to support them to work and be a good citizen, be a member of the community. They recycle, they give blood, they volunteer, and those kinds of things. Kind of action they might do, or aside from giving blood, they might contribute food to a food drive. And their core assumption is that in order to solve social problems and improve society, citizens must have a good character, but you must be law-abiding and fit in. You see this as a very kind of conservative, if you will. There'll be good, upstanding fines, nothing wrong with it, but none of this kind of stance is going to lead to a significant kind of change. The participatory citizen description here is someone who's more active in organizing community organizations, organizes community efforts, might know how to leverage community agencies to get things done, and know some strategies for accomplishing this task. So for the participatory citizen, their orientation is that in order to solve the problems of society, citizens must, engage and not just be law-abiding, kindly, responsible, honest citizens, but they actually need to be involved in the system as it is. And in the third orientation is the justice-oriented citizen, and this is the sort of the dark t-shirt wearing beardos. No, sorry, folks who are, looking at assessing the way the structures operate and how they might be fundamentally inequitable, and trying to seek and address some of the fundamental injustices in the world. And so to solve problems, citizens must question and change the actual systems itself. This is maintain the system, this is to work within the system, and this might be to try to actually question or how you maybe want to change the system. So if you go to the sample action here, I think it's a nice little one, right? That you, for personal responsible citizenship, I'll donate some food. Participatory, I'll organize a food drive, where the justice-oriented citizen is interested in examining the structural issues of why people are hungry in the first place and might try to act to solve root causes. But the question becomes, well, while you're working on this, which is perhaps necessary, there's still people who maybe just need some of the food, and in order for people to get the food, you need people to organize it. So, people might make an argument that there's value in all three of these orientations. So that's a bit of an overview of some of the concepts afloat in the field of global citizenship education. Hopefully that provides you with some sense of the breadth and multiple entry points for that disparate field. What does it look like in Ontario context? Well, I'm going to provide to you a broad introductory to some of policies, which I think that citizenship education is really visible in the Ontario curriculum domain currently. One being taking a quick peek at the character development initiative, which I think has a real emphasis that aligns well with kind of the personal citizenship stance that Westheimer was speaking about. It's about developing one's personal capacities to contribute. Then there's this new document, the 21st Century's Competencies. So I ask you to read a piece of that. And for me, that one really emphasizes in some ways, I think, aspects at least of more of a participant. How do you participate with shaping students' educations to be ready for the 21st century? And then this third policy document, which is the Equity and Inclusive Ed Strategy, which has been around since 2009, and this has a justice orientation. So in some ways, it's kind of nice to see the provincial government covers all three, at least in policy fields. So in terms of character education, what's in the document, part of me is tempted to just invite you to take a look at it, but here we go. We'll take a quick little peek. See here, this is the document that came out in 2006, so it's been in play for a decade, and it has, as it says there, the key beliefs, components, etc., and sort of the way it's being enacted in the province. Key beliefs and principles, as you can read there. Character development is primary responsibility, acknowledging of parents and families. It's cornerstone of a civil, just, and democratic society, etc. It's kind of a mom and apple pie. It's none of it really, I think, anyone would find offensive within here. It really emphasizes on individual character, as the title of the document says, and acknowledging that the society is increasingly diverse, that we need to really support character development so that people can function within and be respectful of Canada's system as it is. What does it look like in practice? So as I say, it's been around for a decade. Probably many of you have been exposed to these kinds of things. So for the TDSB, they have their own character development site, they emphasize these, I think it's 9 kinds of priorities. They have monthly themes. I know you'll drive by schools, on the front you'll say September is respect month, October is responsibility month. My kids would tell me, they'd come home, oh, we had a character at assembly today and someone came in and spoke about being personally responsible or emphasizing fairness. There's all of these things, there's nothing wrong with them. I think the critique has been is that it's a little bit thin, not too substantive, and has modicum of impact. However, it's pretty hard to be critical of wanting to promote people to be honest, fair, promote integrity and perseverance. Those are all good things. So that's a very cursory overview of the character read. Initiative and policy domain. The 21st century competencies one's pretty interesting. It was released just this last winter. Didn't expect to read the entirety of it. It's really what it says, which is I haven't seen before in the Ontario education policy field, that its intent is to shape the fundamental frame of Ontario's vision for education. It's floated as trying to inform all future curricular documents and policy initiatives within the province in education. It's pretty interesting. And it situates 21st century competencies, that's the language that they chose within this field of disparate literature as well. For some of it references deeper learning, 21st century skills, global competencies. You can see all of these pieces. And it comes from them having done a survey of all the sort of global ed 21st century learning kinds of documents and concepts out there. I think an interesting piece that speaks to in one of the earlier sections is the distinction between skills and competencies. And the way that I've come to think about the way they're trying to say it, so imagine you all may have the skill to ride a bike, the actual mechanics, hopping on, staying upright, and moving forward. But someone who is competent is someone who might be competent to be able to move and navigate in traffic. So skill might be the very discrete ability, where a competency means you can apply that ability to a range of specific contexts. And so they're interested in terms of learning is promoting not just skills, but actual competencies. So the kinds of things that students can do in schools actually can translate to a whole range of contexts. And they acknowledge that these skills or competencies are not just simply content, but many of them are really soft skills, interpersonal, intrapersonal, so interior kinds of reflective capacities, as well as ethical qualities. And the document states that for them, that recognizing that we don't know the future that our students are going to be entering into. Only thing we know is that society is changing so rapidly, technology is changing so rapidly, that that content is so easily accessible on this thing called the World Wide Web, that really the priority needs not to be about content, but in order to develop these particular capacities or competencies: critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity, and innovation. And it says 5 C's because there's 5 C's of phone. They just have 4. I can't remember what it is. Oh, it's capitalism. No, it's not that. It's I cannot recall which it is, but you get the notion that the emphasis is more on sort of these soft skills and thinking skills, which are maybe supplanting traditional content drivers. And furthermore, the document speaks to the importance of these different types of citizenship, both local citizenship, global citizenship, and digital citizenship. And, particularly we're recognizing that the planet is changing remarkably because of technology, and that students need to have citizenship skills to participate across all those multiple domains. And they drive where they come out from this document, as I said, looking at the multiple jurisdictions where this kind of they look at UK, they look at Australia, they look at lots across Scandinavian countries, Europe, etc. And they kind of distill those into the sets of competencies that they've identified based upon a survey of other jurisdictions. The document also points to two sections, one emphasis on policy and one on for practice. And I think what's interesting, and this is what you're going to hear across this course, and I think across your MT program, really foregrounds attention to particularly inquiry. There's a whole bunch of different models and approaches to inquiry education, emphasis certainly in technology. And this is a real tell on this document, which is what leads to some critique, is this language of entrepreneurial. There's a real emphasis on innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, which for some people is uncomfortable. And this document really aligns well with the ethos and approach of Rotman's integrative thinking, which is directly referenced in this document and is one of the approaches towards 21st century thinking that we're going to be exploring in this class. The third and last policy I want to introduce you to was this one, Ontario's equity inclusive ed strategy. It has a longer history of which I care to share with you at another time, I suppose, but really it grew out of ongoing recognition. There's a whole bunch of inequities in the education system, partly becoming more apparent because of the continued changing face in Ontario. I mean, Ontario is really, and the GTA in particular, is a pretty remarkable jurisdiction. You may or may not be aware of, but people come from around Europe and the United States and East Asia, as well as Australia, to study Ontario, to examine Ontario, because we have a particular take on inclusion that, at least in name, is a bit distinct. And I actually think, I'm not doing totally, not to say there aren't warts, but there's some real attributes to how we approach this conversation on equity inclusion. Anyway, it's documents like this that really try to provide some policy to support the pursuit of a more just and inclusive education system. And it's designed, as it says, to uphold the Ontario Human Rights Code and the Charter of Rights and Freedom. So what's in the document? There's some key terms expressing definitions around what the distinction between what's diversity, what's equity, what's inclusive education. You can find those there. I think that the big concept, as I referenced the other day, is saying it's not just, to go back, these are policy commitments by the province that all teachers are supposed to be embraced. It's not just your political ideology. It's not just because you might have a certain sensibility. And in fact, it's all teachers' job all system leaders to promote inclusive education and to pursue equity. And that doesn't mean treating all people the same without regard for their individual differences. And so, sharing with you a similar version of this image last week, where people can think of equality as being sameness, and there is a space sometimes for equality, 100%. But where it falls down is that if you think that about in the name of equality is giving the same thing to everyone leads to inequitable outcomes. When I use the example of the eyeglasses, there are all sorts of examples around economic, physical differences that can lead to barriers for people. And if they just had a little bit of a boost, they could easily perform as with others. And it's not about trying to make sure that they all have the same performance. People say, oh my God, it's communism. It's not that. It's about just trying to assure that everyone has a base as best as we can provide for them to achieve the goal. And the goal here is for everyone to see the game, right? That seems like a pretty fair goal. Other parts of the document is that they draw a connection between equity and excellence, trying to say that to have really bright, capable, and smart students means it also that there's attention to that all students have that equitable opportunity to achieve, and that some understanding of equity is actually part of the excellence agenda. Well, these are some of the principles. I'm feeling that we're getting to the 40-minute mark, but and you'll come back to this through your course on anti-discrimination education. But I think really important piece here is that this is a policy which speaks to the entirety of all teachers and the entire system, which is responsibility. So that it influences and informs board policies, leadership principles, etc., informs guidelines on curriculum, religious accommodation, professional learning, etc. So it's a fairly broad encompassing and I think pretty progressive kind of policy position. And it is to be the entire milieu of which informs all of these other policy domains. So here, there's the Aboriginal Ed strategy, there's the Student Success Learning to 18, there's curriculum content safe schools, all of these different domains of the education system, many of which we'll be investigating through this course because they're all sort of policy areas, are all within the context and informed by an equity inclusive education strategy, which itself, if you recall, connects to a global citizenship kind of educational stance. Which brings us back to, so you have Ontario's context, you have these concepts in the theoretical field, but you also have at the UN level a commitment to global citizenship education. I referenced the Ban Ki-moon Education First initiative a couple years ago. More recently, they published a document here on global citizenship education. A friend and colleague of mine here at OISE worked on that. He was one of the two key authors, which was consolidating the input from I don't know how many countries, multiple countries across the world, and trying to come up with some sort of more common core definitions and understandings of global citizenship education. Kind of cool. Anyway, of course, with the UN, there's more attention to all the international conventions and treaties and organizations, and that those have significant implications for global citizenship and what it looks like. But really, I think, to echo much as was been said in the prior 30-some minutes, almost minus 40 minutes now, is this, the global citizenship education really is this broad umbrella which incorporates attention to human rights education, peace education, educations for sustainable development or environmental, if you will, education for international understanding, etc. And they further break down that again, because this is what it seems, right? To try to give some entry points to those cognitive domains, social emotional domains, and behavioral dimensions to global citizenship education, of which we may or may not return to. So, whoa. Thoroughly confused and overwhelmed. That's a lot of content. That's the nice thing about being able to have access perhaps to a screencast, if nothing else, to help you ease off to sleep in the evening. But trying to make sense of the multiple connections of the world, where to start? Where do you begin? Well, at the start, right? You got to start somewhere. We all start somewhere. And I think hopefully you thereby can see value in the multiple entry points, whether your commitment is environmental, whether your commitments are more sort of on a issues around class, whether it's around language, whether it's around sexual orientation, which all of these pieces are entry points to try to contribute to this notion of helping support students to become fully engaged global citizens. Pretty exciting stuff. And so one thrust in the course is to continue to develop a capacity, which you already clearly have, but to promote thinking skills and approaches that may then lead you to aid your own students to see the connections and be intentional where they stand in relation to these complex, pervasive issues. The world can be overwhelming. There can be multiple intersecting kinds of issues, and you as a teacher are going to have to decide where and where you stand and how you respond, because it's just by feet of you being in the room. That's what's going to happen. So the aim is to provide you with some kind of conceptual tools to support you to be very intentional and thoughtful in those responses. And that is a pretty darn exciting kind of opportunity for learning and educational agenda for us. I'm looking forward to learning with you. Thanks so much. Bye.